video is looking at a short extract from Act 2, Scene 2, looking at the different reactions of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth to the murder of Duncan, the regicide that Macbeth has just committed on Lady Macbeth's encouragement and planning. So you could use this material either for an essay here, as we're going to looking at comparing and contrasting their different reactions, or as part of a wider analysis of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, because we're going to be drawing in things from before this scene and after this scene. You can see we've got some annotation there already, and just going to pick up and kind of talk through some ideas. So I'd always make sure that you annotate an extract so you can spot patterns. You know, there's an awful lot of repetition, there's an awful lot of kind of connection between the different aspects of all sorts of elements of texts. And you can pick that up if you're annotating. And it makes you aware of those patterns and allows you to write a more sophisticated piece, because you are making those connections at a much higher level than just chronologically working through something. So we start off, we kind of come in as Macbeth has started to talk to Lady Macbeth and saying how he believes he's overheard two people crying out in their sleep as he's kind of gone to commit this murder. And it's not entirely clear who this is. Some people have speculated that it's servants, some people have speculated that it's in fact Duncan's sons, Michael and Donalbain, and some people have thought it's the grooms who later the Macbeth's frame and ultimately who Macbeth murders, because they want to blame the regicide on them. But what is obvious is that Macbeth here is in such a state that he isn't being clear. He isn't quite making sense. But he is preoccupied. He is entirely focused on this idea that when he heard one of them say, "God bless us," the other automatically said, "Amen." And Macbeth couldn't say Amen, because, you know, if you think of that word Amen, it kind of signifies that you are actively engaged in kind of agreeing with the statement of faith that's gone before it. So, you know, if you think of the Christian pattern of worship, you know, somebody says a prayer, says Amen, everybody repeats Amen. It kind of affirms what's just been said. And Macbeth finds himself unable to say that. So there's this all of a sudden kind of highlighting what I'd like to kind of call a kind of sincerity or lack of sincerity of this saying Amen. When Macbeth needs to say it, when it counts, when it matters, he can't say it. So that moment where he wants to be included in this blessing, those words will, or that word will not come out of his mouth, because at that point, what it represents. When it needs to be genuine, it doesn't work. Whereas now it is a concern and a kind of preoccupation. He repeats it and repeats it kind of frequently because he's increasingly fixated on what his ability to say it insincerely or without that genuine faith means, compared to, you know, the fact that he can't say it when it matters. So again, we can link that into that idea of appearance and reality. We've got a play where at the start, you know, Macbeth is what he claims to be, brave Macbeth, and well, he deserves that name. He is a loyal subject of the king's. He is a kind of brave fighter. He is honourable. He is trusted. And as soon as Lady Macbeth and you know, that Macbeth himself start to contemplate this idea of look like the innocent flower but be the serpent under it, there is a divergence, there is a splitting of their public face and their private personas, okay, or their public personas and their private identities. And this is another piece of evidence of that, okay. Macbeth wants to genuinely be kind of saved, wants to genuinely be part of that prayer, can't be, is able to say it when it doesn't count. And Lady Macbeth dismisses that, and you can see that actually Lady Macbeth, you can talk about the amount of linguistic space she takes up at this point compared to the amount of space Macbeth's dialogue's taking up, because she is brief and she is dismissive, and her sentiment and her tone can be both of those things. Don't think about it so much, consider it not so deeply. And Macbeth keeps coming back, and part of that is because he knows what he's done. We've already had his soliloquy where he says, if it were done when 'tis done. Part of that is he says, if it was finished, if it was all over and done with Duncan's death, then I'd jump the life to come. There would be that passing over of the afterlife for the rewards, the secular, the worldly rewards of power and status here. But now it's actually irrevocable. Now it's actually kind of something that can't be undone. If it were done, can't be undone. He starts to appreciate exactly the consequences of it. Just noticed here I've put that little note, and this is why I annotate beforehand so I kind of don't forget things. I wonder in terms of that, his hangman's hands. I'd pick up on the aspirant H there, giving that, I suppose, the breathlessness, the worry, the concern, the sound. But also he is comparing his hands to those of an executioner who would kind of not only hang, but then would also be involved in the kind of drawing and quartering, the chopping up of the victim. So, it's harking back to all of that blood. But also, if you want to relate it to elsewhere in the play, Macbeth has this tendency to try and distance himself from what he's doing by naming body parts. Look at the "is this a dagger" speech. How many times can he try and distance himself from what he's about to do by talking about elements of himself. Same with his use of euphemism in the "if it were done" soliloquy, looking at talking about it and the assassination and the deed, etc. It's all about kind of not getting close up and involved. But now he is, he's literally covered in blood, and this is about to start really freaking him out. Don't use the phrase freaking him out in your essay. So we've got then, Lady Macbeth, as it were, noticing that her husband is kind of, seems to think at least that he is now under this kind of physical influence of higher powers. I physically can't say it, it's stuck in my throat. And she uses her own kind of euphemistic. A euphemism, remember, is when we use a softer term in place of a harsher term. Rather than saying died, we say passed away. So here, rather than, saying these regicides or these murders or these brutal kind of acts of violence, it's these deeds, these things, don't think of them. And her idea of, don't think of it, they'll make us mad, right? This, obviously foreshadows what's going to happen to her later on in the play. She will be driven mad. But looking at it here, it's interesting to kind of split Lady Macbeth again, appearance and reality, what's going on consciously, what's going on subconsciously, all of these layers. There's on a superficial level, on that surface level, she's saying, look, don't think about it, forget about it, doesn't matter. But then that, it will make us mad, that idea that this will happen, there is that certainty there, that if you think about it, it will make you mad. So her subconsciousness already knows, the impact, the potential impact, maybe the inevitable impact of what they've done. If you think about it, it will make you mad. The problem is that neither of them are going to be able to stop thinking about it to some extent. And Macbeth is still fixed on, what he has remembered from the murder. And it's almost like he's concentrating on the flashbacks of the external things to avoid thinking of the detail of the murder itself. Because he talks about thinking he heard a voice cry, "Sleep no more. Macbeth doth murder sleep." And it's a good idea when you're looking at Macbeth to start to group together the instances of Macbeth not being able to rely on his own senses. So think of, is this a dagger I see before me? It's saying here, I thought I heard a voice cry this. He kind of, the implication is he didn't hear a voice. This is all in his head. Obviously, Banquo's ghost later on, is that actually a ghost? Is it something from Macbeth's own subconsciousness? He starts to kind of, not be able to rely on his senses from a very early stage in the play, and that carries on through. None of which is particularly good when he's trying to rely on his own judgment to guide him the right way. And again, that itself links into the idea of Macbeth is really bad at interpreting things. I think if you look at him saying the witches are imperfect speakers, Macbeth is an imperfect listener. He translates things incorrectly. But here he moves from our men to being then fixated on sleep. And you can see that I have started to circle a number of times. We've got sleep here. This is now at the forefront of his mind because he is aware that he has lost the restorative and redemptive power of sleep. It is now inaccessible. This is almost a secular sign, and I keep using this word secular, it means worldly. Okay, this is a physical kind of idea that if you have a quiet conscience, if you have nothing to worry about, you can sleep. If you have a guilty conscience, you can't sleep. Insomnia then as now was taken as a sign of a guilty mind or having too much on your mind, and he can't fix it. Nothing can now ever be fixed. And he has to live with the consequences of that. And this balm of hurt minds, this kind of soothing power, is now going to give way to this later comment of, my mind is full of scorpions. It can't be soothed. It is constantly being stung later on. Sleep is a nourisher. He has nothing to feed his soul. We've lost the ability to pray. He's lost the ability to sleep. You think of his, comment at the end of the If It Were Done soliloquy. I have nothing but my vaulting ambition. Yeah, he really is just stuck with his drive for a throne that will destroy him, and an awful lot more. And Lady Macbeth interrupts him, and wants to know exactly, what he's talking about, but Macbeth is still on at this voice. It won't leave him alone. And the idea that he thinks the voice is calling to all the house is that idea of he feels he has nowhere to hide. That there is some sort of announcement or revelation. Look at the reference to Tarquin's steps, for example, and the cobbles crying out during that. Is this a dagger speech? Look at Lady Macbeth's concern later on that Macbeth's reaction to Banquo's ghost is going to basically kind of reveal what's happened, and the irony that Lady Macbeth reveals her complicity in everything herself through her own madness and sleepwalking. But this idea of revelation, they are going to be found out, they are going to be denounced and revealed. So Macbeth will sleep no more. You've also got the kind of, he starts to use his titles, Glamis, Cawdor. He doesn't use, notably doesn't use the reference to being King of Scotland. But here, as in so many other places, he's echoing the witches. That when he comes on and talks about, it being a night foul and fair, he echoes the witches. As he leaves the stage in that scene, he echoes the witches. It kind of raises the question, to what extent is he autonomous? Is he independent? To what extent is he in some ways a puppet? Does that make it better or worse? How much is Macbeth in charge of his own fate? And Lady Macbeth, having heard about this voice over and over again, look at her practicality. Who was it that thus cried? Macbeth seems to be talking about this disembodied voice, just the voice, and she says, well, who was it? If there's someone up, who was it? And she starts to get concerned about his psychological stability, okay? Because, I'm just going to put that down there, you can't see that I have a little window on my bit that's stopping me typing there, writing there. We've got psychological stability because she tries to evoke all the things that she wants him to have. all the qualities, his nobility, his worthiness, his status, to try and snap him out of it. So she is very much kind of, practically speaking, very much kind of restating everything to try and get him back on track. And she starts giving him orders. Go and get some water, right? And you can see, talking here, it's almost like, she's taking control of him, almost like she's ordering around a child at that point. And they both have very different ideas of blood, which is worth bearing in mind, and the whole idea of blood in the play of Macbeth. But we've got this idea that she views blood as something which is physical and is going to both help and hinder them. It is a physical kind of manifestation of the murder, but can be manipulated. It is a filthy witness. It's kind of, dirty evidence. It's going to bear witness. It's going to, have that idea of revelation against them unless he washes his hands. But also, she, takes the opportunity and says, you've got to go and put the blood over the grooms. You've got to use the blood to frame the grooms. She notices that he's still got the knives. And if you see this on stage, as a director, you would have to think, how on earth does she not see the knives up until this point? He might have them holstered or in kind of sheaths or something, and then take them out and be looking, or she notices them in some way for the first time. But as soon as she sees the knives, it's like, what are you doing? Why did you bring the knives here? They must lie there. Okay, so these modal verbs, there's another one later on that I found. Here we go. It must seem their guilt. Okay, and so, she is saying what has to happen. Looking at this note down here, she's constructing her narrative with no room for interpretation. This has to happen. This has to be the way it goes. Right, so she is very much in control. And again, these imperatives, go carry them, oh smear. And Macbeth refuses. We've had this order kind of do this blending of appearance and reality again. You've got to go and frame the grooms so they appear guilty. But I am afraid to think what I have done. Look on it again, I dare not. So a couple of things there. She's already said if you're thinking about it, it will make you mad. And he knows that because I'm afraid to think of what I've done. So he believes her totally. He's aware. And pick up this idea of eyes and sight, and again link it to his previous distancing that I mentioned a moment ago. The idea that he doesn't want to be hands-on. He didn't want to be hands-on. He doesn't want to, in some ways, accept responsibility for some of these things. He doesn't want to go back in there. And Lady Macbeth's infirm of purpose, stop wobbling, stop wavering, give me the daggers. Okay, so she will take it on. And again, this ordering him about. And the sleeping and the dead are as but pictures. So she is refusing to contemplate the significance of anything other than a very kind of two-dimensional picture of what's in front of her. It doesn't matter if they're sleeping, doesn't matter if they're dead. It's all just an image. Ironic in terms of what ultimately happens to her. They're all like pictures. And, she again, kind of, I suppose, goes in on that idea of his strength and his masculinity. Being like a baby. Only babies fear painted devils. They're not even real, right? And look at the idea of eyes and sight. It's well worth going through and picking up more sight imagery from the whole play as a motif. And she is, again, practical. There was this belief that bodies continued to bleed if you'd been murdered, and they would bleed in the presence of the murderer. And she says, no, if he's still bleeding, if he does bleed, then I'll use that to decorate the groom's faces. And that will make it appear that they are guilty. The must there and the seem, this appearance and reality thing again. She's using blood as decoration, as ornament, as something to mislead, which is deeply ironic because the truth of the blood comes back and gets her. Again, we have Macbeth and his jumpiness, I guess. He's really unsettled because he keeps hearing noises. And this is a noise, there is a knocking, but what is it, when every noise appalls me? His reactions are off. He is now kind of in this state of instability, shown by the repeated use of these questions. right? He doesn't know what's going on. He's not certain. This is kind of not king material at this moment in time. And he focuses on his eyes because he says, or what he can see, because every noise is appalling him. Every noise is making him jumpy. So, let's see what I can actually got in front of me. What hands are here? Again, even it's not my hands, this distancing thing, what hands are here? They pluck out mine eyes. So it's kind of almost disintegration of him now. But, the idea he doesn't want to look on things. Use the hands that are covered in blood to remove your eyes means you can't see. And the question in terms of will the whole ocean belonging to the classical mythological god Neptune, will this wash the blood from my hands? It's all very well, Lady Macbeth saying, go and wash your hands and it'll all be done with. No, he says, all of the water in the ocean, that's not going to wash my hands. Rather, if I try and wash my hands in the sea will turn red. So as far as Macbeth's concerned, there is this, massive, endless amount of blood on his hands, metaphorically now, which would literally change the world. And we can look, later on in the play at all those images of nature and nature kind of rebelling against itself and turning on itself. Now Duncan has been murdered. Look out for the line about the horses eating themselves or eating each other, and how quickly people move off that. It always occurs, actually there's a line about horses eating each other, and everyone just goes, yeah, and this happened. It's like, what? But you have this whole kind of disturbance thing going on to mark that idea of the chain of being has been disrupted, the divine right of kings has been interfered with. This regicide is an act against God, not just an act against secular authority. And there's some kind of degrees of playing with that line as well, depending on whether you want to put a break in it. You can actually say making the green one red, as in the green one, the 1C, or making the green one red, as in it all becomes one colour of red after it was green. But one way or another, the whole sea is going to be tainted, is going to be polluted by this idea of the blood on Macbeth's hands. And Lady Macbeth comes back. I have a feeling that there is her exit up there. And she comes back aligning herself physically with Macbeth. Look, I'm covered in blood too. My hands are red as well. But I shame to wear a heart so white. I'll turn the page in a moment. But this concept of shame, she's going again for his honour, his masculinity, and all the things that up to now have made his identity, brave Macbeth, for well, he deserves that name. No, this is now shame. Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? All the stuff about, are you a man? She's saying, my hands are your colour, but I would be ashamed to be reacting the way you are. And so, yes, we just get that to wear a heart so white. So again, that idea of the appearance, reality, internal, external. Thinking, we started at the beginning and said, if you wanted to do a close reading exercise using this material to kind of say, okay, how does Shakespeare present the different reactions of the two of them to the regicide here? And that would be your kind of first layer of thinking. Your second and third layers of thinking, especially if you've got an exam which calls on you to look at moments from the play and to draw on your knowledge of the rest of the play. Prior to this, Macbeth's soliloquies are really useful. Lady Macbeth's kind of attitude to planning, authority, ruthlessness, pragmatism, practicality, darkness, strength, all really useful. And after this scene, looking at Macbeth's increasing drive, the sidelining, if you like, of Lady Macbeth and her psychological disintegration that then ultimately leads to her death. Hopefully that helps. Good luck with thinking about the play.